welcome to a bonus episode of the Concast. We're in and around the early 30s in the episode, and I wanted to start interviewing some people. And this gentleman, obviously his reputation is well recognized in the industry, just released his first book, Ligament Pain Referral Patterns, which we both got here. So I thought it would be great to have my friend Robert Libby on as a bonus episode to the Concast, a podcast where we discuss everything health, wellness, fitness in an attempt to better understand the human body. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this discussion just around our industry. We're both massage therapists, so our industry in general, and hopefully see some value for all of the complementary modalities out there, because we're all doing such a great job. So, this is new to me. I've never interviewed somebody on my podcast, so it's going to be a learning experience for me, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I think the first place we should start is just a little bit of a background about yourself. Obviously, you've now written a book, but you've been in the industry for a long time. And so a lot of people are going to know who you are, but for those people that don't know who you are, just give a little bit of a background about kind of how you got into the massage field specifically and just what you're doing now.
I graduated Canadian College Massage and Hydrotherapy in Ontario in 1994. My family is sort of split, where on my dad's side of the family, there is a lot of police and law enforcement and naval sort of history. And on my mother's side of the family is all medicine. I've got uncles that are chiropractors, veterinarian. I've got cousins that are nurses and dentists and occupational therapists. And my grandmother was a surgical nurse, through the 50s, 60s, all through that kind of stuff. So
right.
There's a bit of pull both ways, and the medical sort of pull was a little bit stronger in me. So, like all of us growing up, we all have certain injuries that we sort of have to recover from through our teens and that kind of stuff. So there were some injuries that I had that I had to recover through. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do after graduation, after high school graduation. I was seeing a chiropractor for some treatment. And in all honesty, my brain hadn't kicked in yet. Just numbers and research and science and chemistry and biochemistry. I didn't get it. But my uncle's a chiropractor. I'm receiving treatment from a chiropractor. And I thought, wow, that looks like a fantastic profession to get into. And then I found out that it was a 4-year Bachelor of Science and then another 4 years of doctorate afterwards. And I thought, oh my God, I can't string two words together half the time. So, but he had a registered massage therapist working with him. And I thought, wow, no, there's something I never thought of before. So I investigated and talked to her and interviewed her, and she had informed me that there was a massage therapy school in downtown Vancouver. They had a weekend course, introductory course that you could take, sort of get your feet wet. You learn, the basic effleurage and petrissage techniques, and then it gives you an idea of if this might be a profession that you want to get into. And the very first night, I fell in love with it. I thought, this is awesome. That's it. There's no plan B. This is my plan A. I'm going forwards with this. And there was no turning back. Immediately upgraded to, my first year university sciences. And then I applied to Canadian College because West Coast College at the time, they were only taking in one class a semester. It was completely different ownership at that point.
Right.
And it had a 2-year wait list, and I didn't want to wait 2 years.
Right.
So Canadian College had an opening in their very next enrollment. So I went out there and did the 2-year course in 18 months and haven't looked back.
Wow. Yeah, I think, and do you know, because this has been asked to me as well. I have a kind of a similar story where I just had this moment where I had a conversation with somebody and decided at that point in time that this is what my path was going to be. Mine was at a job fair, and when people ask me about it, like that particular moment, I don't really know why, honestly, but that's what I was going to do. Was there something like about that course or that instructor or that the interactions you were having with the people that really sort of helped make that decision for you? Or was it just like, I put hands on tissue, this is what I'm meant to do?
Yeah, I'd always been doing something with my hands. Like I'd always been tinkering and pulling things apart. And, I remember my parents bought their first hi-fi definition stereo system, and they were all proud that they put it together. And then they went out for coffee, and when they came home, I had it all apart in the living room.
Right.
I'm like, what did you do? I'm just used to using my hands for stuff, just very tactile. And it just, I don't know, it was just one of those things where the light bulb went on, and that was the direction I was going, and there was just no turning back. It wasn't necessarily a cognitive decision that was made. It was more of an innate
Just
sort of emotion feeling. This is me. This is comfortable. This is me. This is what I've been looking for. Let's go.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've been doing it now 20 years ish?
Yeah, I'm at 26.
26 years.
Only 26.
26. You're about
only
what,
26.
halfway through, maybe?
About a quarter of the way through. Yep.
Yeah. Nice.
You know what's funny is that I taught in Scotland a couple of years ago, and they do a course review. So all the participants, they do a course review, and I had asked the president of the Scottish Massage Therapy Organization if I could have the reviews, because it's always nice to, in our heads, we're awesome.
Right.
But it's always nice to have, the class perspective and know that, there's always opportunity for improvement. So I want to know where to make improvements. And one of the comments that I got back was from, I don't know, his name is like Bob. Would you take this course again? And it's like, yes, but I need some more time to let the information, there's a lot of information, I need some more time to let it sit. Maybe in a couple of years, I would like to take this course again. And then at the bottom, it says, how long have you been practicing for? And I showed the number to my wife, and I'm like, that can't be right. Is that a 1 or a 7? And this guy had been practicing for 75 years.
Wow.
75. And I was like, so I contacted the president, and I said, all right, is this number right? She's like, yep. He's been practicing that long. He's just been doing it since he was a teenager, and he's 90 now, and he's still going.
That's
and he
unreal.
shows up, still has a practice, still treats patients, shows up to all the meetings. And It was just, just a huge inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't even imagine. I've been doing it for going into year 14. You've been 10 years longer than me. And I just can't imagine if I had 70 plus years of experience under my belt, all of the things that I would have seen. And I mean, that's what really molds you into the therapist that you want to be, right? It's just continually seeing cases. The same thing is never the same, learning from it, looking at reports, talking to colleagues, and just, that's, I think both of us really love the career because it's just, nothing is ever the same. And I think that's, my practice has evolved over the years from dealing in sort of one niche market to now becoming more based in concussion. And you've been doing this a lot longer than me. So like when you first started, did you find that you wanted to work with a certain group of people from the hop, or did you just kind of get your feet wet in the first few years? And then further to that point, like what led you down the path of sort of investigating now where you're at with ligament articular strain technique and the book and all that? That would be really great to know.
Yeah, like most therapists, when you're starting out, you're just trying to pay bills and pay off your student loans and, make rent and provide the best service that you can. And we all come out thinking that we know a lot and that we know everything, and that everything that we've learned can be applied to our patients. And what you quickly figure out is that not everything is applicable to everybody, and not everything works in the way that some instructor had told you.
Right.
So there was an urge to continue the education and to continue learning and to sort of seek out completely different techniques to practice with and see if we could help people. I've had a couple of injuries in the past, like a fractured pelvis and stuff like from way back that's fully recovered now.
Right.
But I was interested in, okay, well, you know, like I noticed some deficiencies and dysfunction with the hip. Some of the treatment techniques that I was using with my patients, I wasn't finding that the outcomes were exactly what I was told they should be. So I just started searching at that point. And I just, once, the brain kicked in. Once I started taking post-grad courses, I just got hooked. And to be really honest, for about the last 24 years, I've typically had about 100 credits every year. You know, and in BC, we need 24 credits every 2 years.
Right.
So I'm sitting at, 100 to 200 credits every year to 2 years.
Right.
So I would just seek out the people that looked like they'd been practicing for a long period of time. They had the knowledge, they had the experience. And with some people, I've actually taken their courses or their series 2 or 3 times, because as they've been in the profession longer, their perspective has changed. They've changed how they teach. They've changed what they teach. And it's just, it's just a great avenue to learn from those guys.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty blessed to have those guys still practicing, because they're my mentors. So I got interested in a little bit more of the physiology about the joint mechanics, ligaments, joint capsules, neurological innervations. I started looking at what other professionals were using, like what the physios use and what the chiros use. And a lot of that stuff is outside of our scope. So although it's nice to have the information, I can't apply it.
Right.
I can make the recommendations and the referrals out, which is always great to have a team around you, either within your clinic and outside the clinic. But manual wise, I needed something that I could do for my patients in the moment, right then and there. So that got me searching into osteopathy. That led me into Andrew Taylor Still. Andrew Taylor Still, William Sutherland are the two that are sort of talked about the most in developing ligamentous articular strain technique. The Dallas Osteopathic Study Group put out a book in around 1999 or 2000. It was sort of their version of what Still and Sutherland had taught. And then from there, I just sort of was self-taught, read all the books on osteopathy, read all the books on Andrew Taylor Still and William Sutherland, practiced the technique, and was really just like in my own 4-wall universe doing this thing.
Right.
And I started treating more and more therapists, and the therapists were like, what is this thing that you're doing? Like, we don't know what this is. Like, what is this? This is awesome. You should teach this. And it just kind of went from there. That led into a number of my patients. They would look at the trigger point charts that we all have on our wall, the really ugly, terrible colored ones.
Right.
And they would say, well, that's not me. I'm like, okay, well, here's a felt marker. You go in and draw in what you are for whatever area that you have a discomfort in. And so I had these charts with these different colored markers all over the place. And I just kind of just made a mental note, mental education, remembering, okay, well, if it's shoulder and it's anterior shoulder, well, it'll be this. And if it's posterior shoulder, it'll be that. And if it's, this ligament, it'll be this. And if it's lat ligament, it'll be that. And it was just my own anecdotal research in my head that I had acquired. In 2008, I moved my clinic and we sort of amalgamated with a physio and a naturopath. And the naturopath was educated and registered in treating with prolotherapy.
Right.
So prolotherapy is an injectable therapy where they inject, for lack of a better term, sugar water into a joint, or they take your own platelets, so platelet-rich proteins. They inject that in, or down in the States and in some parts of Canada, they'll use stem cells, and that helps to sort of establish type 2 collagen to try and stabilize a joint if there's any type of instability or something like that in the joint capsule ligamentous tissue. It tightens it up and provides some stability to it. So he was in my office looking at the referral patterns that my patients had drawn. And he's like, I've seen these before. How have you seen these before? These are my patients for the last,
Right.
10, 15 years at that point. He's like, these look like Hackett referral patterns. What's a Hackett referral pattern? Never heard of this before. I don't know what this is, right? So that was my introduction into prolotherapy, pain referral patterns from George Hackett, Gustav Hemnwell, that were medical doctors and the original prolotherapists out of the United States. So I grabbed all of their research, and then that just exploded into, they did all the research for the axial spine, but then since then, the research has continued for more specific axial spine referral patterns, and the periphery also. So I just took, 8 to 10 years and grabbed all of that research.
Right.
That led to the original ligament pain referral pattern posters. We did a review of the research in 2015, and then had more images and so on and so forth, and then now the book. So everything is all based on research. Obviously, I didn't use any of the information that was anecdotal for my patients.
Right.
But yeah, it's all published, reproducible research. So that's it's a long story about how that got started.
So and just to add clarity to the listeners, these are different referral patterns than, and the majority of people that might be listening might be massage therapists. These are different referral patterns than the traditional theoretical trigger point referral patterns that everyone have been taught, been seen on those posters. And to the best of my knowledge, these are not things that are being taught in entry-level education in our field, and probably a lot of other fields, I'm guessing, because they are based on joint referral and then ligament capsule referral, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they're not trigger points within a ligament. They're not trigger points within a joint capsule. Those actually don't exist. You can't have those things in that type of tissue.
Controversial.
Say again?
Controversial.
No, it's research. And it's not my research. It's just research that's been done for decades by others.
I know.
But all of your joint capsules, all of your ligamentous tissue, they're all neurologically innervated. Yeah. So they all have potential for sensitization and for relaying information. They all have mechanoreceptors in various percentages and portions in all of them. So they have this ability to relay balance coordination, kinesthetic awareness, and danger messages through nociception to the brain and spinal cord. And that gets perceived as referral patterns. That's basic neuroscience is what that is. Yeah. There is always an overlay of different referral patterns. So as clinicians, we have to do our best in, providing the best orthopedic assessment that we can based on the history of the patient and so on and so forth, in order to rule in and rule out what might be potential causes for the discomfort that the patients are coming in with.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. With respect to some of the misconceptions around, some of the injuries that we're seeing, like things like joint injuries in general or ligamentous injuries in general, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on just some of the general misconceptions that, people are being taught in entry-level education and even in some continuing education courses, and then sort of taking that out into practice and using that as either as dogma or even just the general misunderstandings about how, these injuries happen in general. I would love to know sort of in your research what you've discovered, and also anecdotally through your practice, because I imagine that the more cases you're treating of these like articular type injuries, the more they're coming into your practice just by virtue of likes referring like. Uh, what are some of the common misconceptions that you see, and maybe ways that we could be doing it better or even understanding it a little bit better? I'd love to know.
Um, you know, first off, like our definition of acute, subacute, and chronic are completely inappropriate. They're actually not even true. There's research that shows for ligamentous and joint capsule tissues, and this is from research from the early 2000s from researchers named Moshe Solomono. He's instructed at a number of the fascia research conferences and congresses. His research showed that the acute stage of a ligamentous injury can last up to and even longer than 12 months.
Wow.
So, if you think about, okay, well, acute, subacute, and chronic, okay, well, we're taught, acute is, the first 2 weeks,
Right.
subacute is 2 weeks to 6 weeks, and then chronic is, 6 weeks afterwards. It's like, well, acute for ligamentous tissue is a year.
Right.
So what is subacute? How many years afterwards?
Right.
So when we're looking at like what people would consider a simple ankle sprain, for one, it's not simple. People get frustrated with their clinician. They get frustrated with themselves when this ankle sprain that was supposed to have healed in 6 weeks, because that's what they've been told by every medical professional they've seen. 6 months later, they still have pitted edema. They still have vascular swelling.
Right.
They still have balance coordination dysfunctions. They still have pain at night. They still have muscle spasms. The same with ACL, PCL, MCL tears. People complain of, hamstring quadriceps tightness that lasts years, decades.
Yeah.
So the definition of that needs to change, and your perspective of what you're going to do over that period of time needs to adapt also with that new information. The idea that these are simple injuries, so it's just a simple sprain, it's just a simple soft tissue injury. What people don't realize is that these are neuropsychophysiological injuries. So there's been some damage that's been done to the structure.
Yeah.
That damage has had an effect on the vasculature, on the structure, on the hormonal system, on the neurological system. That plays into the thoughts, beliefs, and expectations of patients. So, am I going to be able to run again on this ankle?
Yeah.
I usually see my running group 3 to 4 times a week. This ankle is killing me. It's causing me to not sleep at night. I'm having to take pharmaceuticals. Is this going to be my life always? I used to love to run. I haven't seen my running group in now 6 months. I'm gaining 10 pounds of weight. Right. So it goes with all of that kind of stuff. So there's where your neuropsychophysiological mechanisms come into place. So people need to recognize that for any injury that we see in our practice, that's what that kind of injury is. And we need to recognize that as massage therapists, we're not just massage therapists, but we are regulated health professions, especially in Canada. And, we are more than what we do with our hands.
For sure.
So that's sort of an aside that goes off that way. These injuries, they have the ability to influence interoception and exteroception, which is, peripherally and supraspinally influencing our ability for balance coordination, kinesthetic awareness, body awareness, all of that kind of thing. So they're not simple injuries. They're actually quite detailed and intricate injuries that take time and effort and thought and reflection and communication with the patient about their lifestyle and their habits.
Yeah. Well, and I think you raise a good point there. A lot of the time you hear, like, as you said, this is a simple ankle sprain or what have you. And then, you'll have people that will come in 14 months post grade 1 ankle sprain, and they have all this myriad of symptoms. And depending upon the person, some of these symptoms can be so complex and seemingly unrelated to an ankle sprain. And the thing that I'm learning the longer that I'm in practice is, anything can basically happen to anyone. And while these symptoms aren't textbook, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily unrelated to the injury that they've had. Maybe they're not, but as you said, it's especially being in Canada, being regulated health professions, it is our responsibility to try and tease that out, maybe make an appropriate referral, or just recognize that, yes, this is something that's within my wheelhouse to be able to treat, and then just, maybe look at it from a different perspective, and then the patient gets resolution. So I think those are all, really fantastic points. Where I really want to get your thoughts are on is within some of these injuries that you're seeing, especially in the joint, what's your opinion on the biological changes within the joint and the tissue, and that influence on the overall like pain cycle, pain experience for the patient, and sort of how you manage it? Because you just sort of touched on some of the sort of biopsychosocial approach or neurophysiological and psychological approach. And what I see a lot in the forums these days is, the biopsychosocial approach, let's say that definition's been around, it's relatively new, let's say, in our field. And it seems as though the pendulum has swung so far the other way that now we're getting so many people say, don't put your hands on people because it's all in your brain, or it's all in your brain and spinal cord. And, I push back so much because, we have to respect biological change in tissue peripherally. And we almost have to do that first before we get into the complexity of the brain. I would really love to get your thoughts on that, and sort of your thoughts with LAST, and how you see that integrated into this whole new approach of therapy.
Yeah, the pain science, the last decade has just been awesome. The way that it has, and a lot of the pain science information, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
It's just, it hasn't made it into our profession as much as it has into others. And even in others, it's kind of lacking, or it's not the correct narrative. So pain science has been around for a long time. But again, in our profession, it's just starting to sort of flow in, and like you said, with that new narrative, with that new information, there is some pushback. Like you said, the pendulum has been very far one-sided, where to the perspective where people think that the body is a car, and that the axle needs to be realigned in order to keep everything fine. There was even a saying, you need to keep the spine aligned in order to keep everything fine. There were huge focuses on leg length discrepancies and correcting scoliosis and things like that. And what people don't realize is that this thing that we're living in is an asymmetrical nonlinear feedback system.
Yeah.
So asymmetrical meaning that nothing is the same from one side to the next. You've got one femur that's longer than the other. The same with your tib and your fib. The same with your hands. The same with anything. It's a asymmetrical nonlinear. So nonlinear would be your fascial system. The fascial system kind of gets poo-pooed on quite a bit these days. Again, it's because the pendulum was so far one way about fascia is everything. It's not everything, but it's an important part. And then this is also a feedback system, right? So it's relaying information back and forth all the time. It's allowing us to be aware of our scenery and our senses and our environment. And we have this psychological cognitive perspective where we can think logically, and we can debate subjects and topics, and we can have our own thoughts and our own perspectives about things. So with the pain science coming in, it kind of was like a sledgehammer to that solid sort of platform where everything was structural based. Now everything for a time had been very psychological based. Well, pain is all in the head. Well, it's not all in the head, actually. And the problem with that message coming out was that, and you've seen this as much as I have in the forums, is that there was a lot of anger and resentment, a bit of bullying on both sides to each other's ideas and ideals. And the problem was that the information is fantastic. It's great to advance our knowledge of that, but there was no guidance as to how to integrate that into your education, your knowledge, your specific practice, your specific patients. There was no guidance as to how to integrate that into a treatment plan or an assessment protocol. So I think that's where the challenge is. And I'm hoping and I'm thinking that, because we've sort of swung one way and now we've swung the other, we're kind of hopefully getting to a point where we're in the middle, where we recognize that it's not either way, it's both ways.
Right.
The idea that at one point regional interdependence for joint tissues was a huge thing, where if you got something at the ankle, you're going to have something at the knee, and if you got something at the knee, you're going to have something at the hip, and then that can go all the way up to the C0, C1.
Yeah.
Well, the definition of regional interdependence has changed in order to accommodate the neuropsychophysiological perspective also.
Right.
So yes, there's some things that will happen structurally, but there's a lot of things that will happen neurologically also.
Yeah.
So there's sort of that sort of perspective where I'm at, where I really like the education on motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is sort of a style of communication where you're not really influencing someone to take an action for their betterment. You're just providing them the options that they've provided you, worded back to them in a different way, which provides them a different perspective and an ability to make a choice for themselves to take a direction. So incorporating the pain science education into motivational interviewing has been an amazing aspect of my practice. So that's been really, really awesome. Some of the things that I think therapists don't realize is that there's a ligamentomuscular reflex, and kind of like what you said, where you recognize that there's certain compensatory protective mechanisms that are at play in other parts of the body that might seem disconnected from the original injury. They're completely connected.
Right.
So we have this ligamentomuscular reflex where the mechanoreceptors in the joint capsule relay information to the spinal cord, which relays it back to the muscle tissue that says, hey, our ankle's going beyond what we're comfortable here. Could you help us out? And you'll have peroneals, gastrocs, soleus, hamstrings, even like suboccipitals will contract in order to try and stabilize that ankle. And that's sort of where those very distant sort of chronicities can sort of come into play also.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, and I think you said it perfectly. I think you're right. It swung one way to begin with. Hopefully we land in the middle, and hopefully we can continue to have these conversations where, we're just not yelling at each other, and we're able to understand both perspectives and understand that at times, local biological tissue is going to maybe create more of a pain experience. And other times it might be, just as you said, like a reflex, and other times it might be truly central. But I would love to see more of what you're talking about with like motivational interviewing, allowing people to make decisions for themselves and just sort of reframe things rather than, and I'm not saying that people are doing this, but the suggestion that we should become psychologists when we're not, allowing people to make their own decisions. Active care programs in and of themselves become very cognitive just by virtue of encouraging people to move around pain, encouraging people to modify their activities of daily living instead of removing them completely. I think we would both agree that active care should be a primary part of every treatment plan. But, you know, I think you're right. I think that we are moving more towards a middle ground, where, you know, if you break your arm, it's important that that arm is broken. And we have to respect the, you know, the fusion of the osseous site first, or in conjunction with some other elements, rather than just, you know, looking at it from one perspective. I think that people that really sort of stand back and look at that biopsychosocial perspective understand that, and understand that there is a middle ground, rather than just sort of getting rid of all of the techniques. And the one thing that I don't particularly love is, like you said in the forums, you're hearing people sort of like really giving negative connotation to certain continuing education courses, because they say that, you know, this doesn't exist, or there's no research to support it, or what have you. And I think that, you know, I think education is important regardless of really what it is. I'm not suggesting that you take a course that isn't grounded in evidence and say that it's evidence-based, but there, you know, you have to give people props for pursuing education in something, and you have to give people props for investigating something that they're interested in, or being passionate about something. I think, so there's that piece, but then I think that, you know, at the same light, you can't be making outlandish claims about something if there's not evidence there, which again, just lands us back in the middle of where we're at. So, you know, I think that we both feel pretty similarly about where we're at in terms of that sort of evolution of biology to psychology, and sort of hopefully landing in the middle.
Yeah, there's you know, one of the things I like to do is, so I've taken sort of my teaching, so I teach a manual technique, ligamentous articular strain technique, and what I've recognized is that over time, as it has progressed through Andrew Taylor Still, William Sutherland, Dallas Osteopathic Study Group, and a few others, their narrative has changed in order to accommodate what the understanding of the human body was at the time. And that's what I'm doing with my courses, is that, you know, I recognize, you know, what their narrative was when it began, and that was based on what we knew and what we know now. And the narrative from then is not applicable to what we know now. Right. So the hands-on techniques are the same, but how we relay the information, the story that we tell, the narrative of how we might acquire the outcomes, that has to be current. And what I've found over the years is that the people that get invested more in the story of the technique rather than just the technique, those are the ones that are the hardest people to make a change. Those are the ones that they become very stuck in the ground. They're very rooted in their beliefs, their thoughts about what they're doing, and the impact it's having on their patients. And those are the guys and the girls that get left behind, because they haven't advanced. Right. So that makes it hard, as I'm sure you've found it at this stage. It makes it hard to look at continuing education courses and go, okay, well, who would I like to learn from? Yeah. Who might have some information that I can incorporate into my practice, because I have a set of patients that I need to focus on, and I don't know if I would like a better information or a better skill to sort of help them. Right. So the people that continue to use the old terms, the old narratives, you know, like I don't even use the word, like I use the word pain in the title, because that's the term that was most used through all of the research that had been documented by the scientists. Yeah. But when I'm in practice with my patients, or when I'm teaching a course to my mentorship group, I rarely use the word pain, because rarely is it actually pain that a person is coming in with. Yeah. They use the word pain because it's been used by somebody else by another medical professional. Yeah. So I always say to them, well, is it pain or is it something else? I provide them the opportunity for a different option. Yeah. well, I've never thought of it as anything else but pain. What else could it be? Well, it could be numbness, tingling, pins and needles. It could be a burning sensation, a loss of sensation, a loss of balance. It could be just an increase in tension, a
Yeah.
stiffness. Like, is it any of those, or is it something completely different?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times in my charting, we don't use pain. We use whatever the term is that the patient has felt the most comfortable with in describing their experience.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point because, as you've alluded to, pain is obviously an output, a stress response. There are many stress responses of an injury, increase in tone, reduction in range of motion, the fact that I can't grab my suitcase out of the back of my car. And so when we solely fixate on the measurable or the objective measure of pain, there are a lot of things that improve in a patient's experience prior to their reduction in experiencing pain, if that's our sole measure. So that when a patient comes in and you've measured, say, 3 or 4 things objectively, and you sort of ask them about, the suitcase or their briefcase in the back of their car, and they say, oh, I've been able to do that without any issue, but I'm still the same. Well, you're not the same. You've improved. And so the more outcomes you have to measure and the broader your discussion, the better off you are, because you can get people to recognize, speaking to what you said about those rigid people, you can open up a broader conversation and say, look, this is not, what you've said is not true. This is sort of where we're at here. And then it kind of goes, oh, okay, now we can, maybe break through and move forward a little bit. If you can do this, then maybe we can get you moving again. And, I think that's a really great approach. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about, in speaking about kind of biology and techniques and being grounded in techniques, one of the biggest things and one of the biggest techniques that all professions are using across the board is joint mobilizations. And I wanted to, and I probably eventually will do a podcast episode on this, but I'd really like for you to give your current opinion on the traditional joint mobilizations. So for those that aren't doing like HVLA or high velocity, low amplitude adjustments, chiros, physical therapists, I'd love to know your opinion on high grade versus low grade joint plays. So grade 1, grade 2 versus grade 3, grade 4 oscillating. And further to that, I'd really love to know your opinion on, do you think direction matters? As per the way many therapists were taught in terms of the traditional convex concave rule, high grade stretch joint capsule, and that's going to stretch and improve range of motion, whereas grade 1 isn't. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, joint play is awesome. It's something that we've all used. It's something that we have all found beneficial for some patients. I'm sure that we've all found that it's not beneficial for other patients. We've had huge, amazing improvements in quality of life for some people, and other people it's been no difference, or it's been made worse. And that just goes for any technique across the board, including LAST and HVLAs and so on and so forth. Yeah, obviously HVLAs are not within our scope. Obviously with HVLAs, based on physics and vectoring and so on, there is a specific way to do the technique, regardless of if a cavitation is acquired or not. It's not really an outcome that they sort of look for, but it's more just like you said, like an increased range of motion. Joint play, the research on the convex concave is sort of, it's not there right now. It used to be very much, a roll and glide this way, glide and roll that way. That's kind of been thrown out. So kind of like with regional interdependence, I think the narrative isn't set any longer. So, so there's that. For joint play, I find that sometimes there's protective mechanisms, or otherwise known as, it's called armoring. There's an armoring protective mechanism in place that will sometimes prevent certain degrees of joint mobilizations from occurring because of the protective mechanism. The body feels that it needs to protect that specific area. And for a therapist to not recognize that and load through it, you're potentially, I'm not going to say you're potentially causing damage or injury to the patient, but what I think you're doing is you're perpetuating the armoring to continue to occur.
Right.
So I have tended to find that less is more with joint mobs and with LAS technique. There was a bunch of research done on stretching. I actually wrote a blog about this a number of years ago, and the research into stretching continues to today. And what they discovered, there was actually a research paper out of Australia where they held a hamstring stretch for 9,000 seconds, and just because they thought, let's just go as long as we can and let's see what the difference is. And they were trying to whatever their outcomes were, they were trying to achieve. What they found was that there was a 1 millimeter length change that occurred in that 9,000 seconds to the hamstring. A millimeter of structural change for the human body it's like from here to the sun for distance. It's an immense amount of change. It did nothing for the patient. Within 12 to 24 hours, the hamstring had returned back to a normal state. So with stretching, we can't really change structure.
Right.
But everybody feels like they've gotten longer.
Yeah.
So the current understanding is that stretching for shorter durations actually has quicker and greater outcomes. So stretching for, anecdotally in my practice, and for myself, I found that, 5 to 7 seconds, you hold a stretch, 5 to 7 seconds, come out of it. Go back into it for 5 to 7 seconds, come out of it. And what that does is it re-educates the nervous system that it doesn't have to protect around that area any longer. So if you hold a stretch for a long period of time, your brain and spinal cord, they get a message of, hey, we've been here for a long time. We're not happy with this. This is not normal for us. We're kind of stagnant. We don't like being stagnant. So something must be wrong. We're going to protect. And then things tighten up. Where if it's 5 to 7 seconds, the brain and spinal cord get a message of increased range of motion, and then you come off of it and they get the sense of being safe. So is it dangerous or is it safe, right? So we have what are called DIMS and SIMS, dangers in me or safety in me. So we want the body to feel as safe as possible. So if you go into a stretch, just a gentle stretch, it doesn't have to be painful or anything, just a gentle increase of tension, stretch 5 to 7 seconds, come off of it for another 5 to 7 seconds, go back into it. You go through that cycle, you will, in my clinic with anecdotal research, we found that we gain greater ranges of motion a lot faster that way. So you're getting a false sense of tissue lengthening while the brain is providing you an increased range of motion that it feels is safe. So I sort of incorporate that research and that knowledge into my joint mobilization techniques. So my joint mobs are very slight, very subtle. I'm also looking for, I know that, there's a thing called palpatoria paradilia, where it's a false sense of what you're feeling, and what you're feeling is not really what you're feeling, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. That's sort of the same as ideomotion, I think, right?
Yeah. I kind of go with a general sense of, okay, well, for this specific patient, I'm used to what their tension, tone, texture, tenderness is, and where their protective guarding mechanisms kick in. And if I can fine tune that within the joint play 1 or 2, and then I can just sort of hold it for that 5 to 7 seconds, or I can incorporate last. I can also incorporate positional release technique. Maybe I can throw in some muscle energy technique, whatever the recipe is, in order to acquire an increased range of motion and an increased function for that patient, then I'll use it. But it always goes with sort of the caveat to the patient of, as far as diminishing pain goes, there's no guarantees. I'm great at returning function and range of motion.
Yeah.
But as far as pain goes, I can't promise you anything. But if I can get you functioning better and maybe your discomfort subsides from an 8 out of 10 down to a 4 out of 10, would that be something that you'd be happy with?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am with joint mobs. Joint mobs are fantastic. I think that therapists don't recognize the protective armoring mechanisms that are in play, and they a lot of times are working through it, and they're perpetuating that to continue to occur.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you have kind of thrown out the directional preference rule. You're not necessarily doing a posterior glide to increase flexion. You're going in there with whatever you feel like, and often what I find, and correct me if this is what you're not doing, is whatever position I feel is most comfortable for them in communicating with them, I'll kind of put them in that position. And then you're maybe doing your joint mobilizations for shorter periods of time than maybe the 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 minutes. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm doing. I
usually go with for example, like a positional release technique. It's a direction of ease.
Yeah.
So if you can go into the direction of ease, and with LAS techniques, they tend to be techniques where you hold it for a long period of time in a position of ease, where you completely, at least you attempt to completely remove that protective armoring mechanism. And that may take 90 seconds, 3 minutes. There have been some positions that I've held for 10 minutes in order to get that neuropsychophysiological change to take place. And you just have to work with the patient's nervous system and with their psychology at that point.
So here's a question. You do the technique, you remove that protective armoring, and then I am going to assume that you're giving them some sort of stability or surrounding stability pattern that you see as more favorable for what they're currently doing. Like I've sometimes referred to as pathological stability, kind of in conversations with colleagues, and that the body always craves stability. It'll find a right way or a wrong way to do it. So I assume that once you've kind of removed that protective tone, you're looking for ways to get feedback into the nervous system that allows that person to be confident and move correctly without that tone. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. Also recognizing that depending on the severity of the injury and how long it's been there for, that the instability might be something that is a permanent thing. The tissue change, the lengthening that's taken place, the instability that's there is beyond what the body is capable of building back up or restabilizing. And that in really, really extreme severe cases, like with shoulder dislocations that are just like constantly dislocating, they need surgery to tighten it back up. Yeah. With ankle injuries, they might need some prolotherapy in order to create some stability through there. Or it might just be like the case of I have a respiratory therapist right now who loves to hike, but she has inverted sprained her ankles so many times, she can't actively stabilize it. Right. Okay, well, you need an orthosis. If you love to go hiking, you need to wear a stability boot to prevent, further dysfunction and discomfort for however long. Surgery, can they plate it and pin it? Yes, but then you're going to lose something on the other side of that. Yeah. Prolotherapy and stem cells, like that's really expensive, and I don't know if the technology is there to create as much stability as what a cheap orthosis can do for the next decade. Yeah. So yeah, it's always sort of with that realization and education back to the patient, where they think that, okay, well, I just need to work out more. I need to do more squats. I need to do more calf raises to strengthen my ankle. That's not going to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point to say, because often you'll hear is, oh, you just need more. You either need more time, you need to wait longer, or you need more strengthening. And maybe you have strengthened as much as you have within the current, structural stability that's available to you based on the number of injuries that you've had. and going with that harm reductionist approach of, I'm going to give them the most minimal thing that I can to get them to where they need to go. And that might be based on what they can afford, their availability to medical care, their health profile. Like, these are all things that have to be considered, rather than just saying, well, everyone needs to be in an orthotic, which also isn't true, but orthotics do play an important role in our healthcare system. We just have to recognize when,
Absolutely.
you know, and treating every injury like it's never happened before, and treating the patient as a whole, I think is really where we have to be. You know, speaking to an earlier point you made, when I first started in therapy, I thought I had all the answers. And now I just say, like, I'm a professional fence sitter. I'll sit right here and I have neither an answer on one side, because I think I can draw from both sides, and I'll sit in the middle. And sometimes I'll fix everything on one day, and other days I will not fix a patient. And,
Yeah.
and I've been doing this a long time, and I'm sure you have as well. And I think for the young therapists that are listening, it's important to recognize that there are days where I fix nobody, and as would you. And those are days where you leave and you don't feel particularly great about yourself, but like, that's just the reality.
You know, I think we have a saying in our office that we don't use the F word in practice.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use fix in our practice, so we don't use the F word. F word is fix.
Right.
And coming from a background of being, let's say, a structuralist, right, where we still have a lot of friends and colleagues that are considered structuralists, where everything is based on, like I said, they perceive the body as a car. Those people become very frustrated and jaded, and unhappy in their practice, because their goal for attainment in their practice is to fix someone, is to have complete resolution, where the person leaves with with no dysfunction and no pain, and their quality of life is the best possible. That's not a reality that exists. And I used to do that. I used to get very frustrated. It's like, wow, I've been like busting my ass, busting my hump to try and fix this patient. But, you know, the patient wasn't doing anything. I see the patient for an hour out of a week, or maybe 2 weeks. Meanwhile, they've got the rest of their life to go on and do whatever they want. So once I sort of removed that perspective of the goal being fixing, my practice became like, I love it. I love my practice. I go to work. I do the best that I can. I educate my patients that, you know, fixing is not something that we're trying to attain. An improvement in quality of life, whatever that is for each individual specific patient, is what we're trying to attain. And I don't get frustrated. You know, I definitely feel wholeheartedly, you know, empathetic towards my patients and what they're going through, and the strife and the struggles and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't get frustrated. I get frustrated with the politics, and I get frustrated with patients coming in using narratives and terminologies from other medical professionals that don't have this current perspective, and then having to sort of combat that a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think as well, some things are just out of our control, or a lot of things are out of our control. Like, what, you know, when that patient leaves the office, what are they going to do? What's their health profile? You know, so many different factors. You know, I know, Robert, we've touched on a lot of this already, but is there anything in the current framework of kind of complementary medicine or manual therapy that you think we need to reframe or change the narrative moving forward? We talked kind of a lot about, you know, structure. We talked a lot about the biopsychosocial model and how we'd like to see it in the middle. Do you feel like there's anything else that we need to reframe to really, you know, get everyone on the same page, provide better education to our upcoming therapists, and even allow some of the more senior therapists to just, you know, change their approach or change their vision, or so we can more collectively come together and sit in the middle of the fence?
Yeah, you know, you get a lot of the older the older guys and girls that when when someone starts speaking like you or I are about the new narrative about pain science and so on and so forth. Some people have come up to me and they've said, well, you know, you've made me feel like I've done nothing with my practice. And in all honesty, I went through about a 5-year period myself where I thought, wow, I suck. Like I've been lying to my patients. I've been doing all this stuff that I thought was the right thing to do, and now I find out that it's this different story that I have to start telling.
Yeah.
Um, and it becomes very sort of emotional. And I think, you know, if people can just recognize that, you know, like what you've been doing with your hands has been a huge, amazing thing for the people that you've been treating. You play an integral part of their life. Um, it's just how you perceive what you're doing that has to change. What you do with your hands is awesome. Your people love you. You see patients, you now see your patients' children, and now you see your patients' children in some of our cases. So you've become just as important as their family physician. You've become just as important as the trusted car mechanic that they refer all their friends and family to because this guy doesn't overcharge you and he gives you the right parts and so on and so forth. You know, we're the people that we sit and listen. We're not counselors, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, but what I can do is I can provide the patient time within that hour to express how they feel. And there always seems to be this sense where new therapists feel the need to get the patient on the table as soon as possible, perform as many techniques in order to justify the amount that they charge per hour. And, you know, their perception is quantity of treatment techniques rather than quality of care. And there's a number of times where patients will come in and say, you know, I booked the appointment. I know you're hard to get into. I booked the appointment. I didn't want to cancel the appointment, but I just don't think I want to be touched today. Okay, well, you've just now refused informed consent. I can now not touch you because you don't want to be touched. So what would you like to do?
Yeah.
I just need to sit and chat. Okay, as long as you understand that I'm not any of these other, I'm not educated in that. I can sit and listen. And then that's where the whole motivational interviewing sort of comes into play, which is awesome. Um, I think that it would be really awesome if, you know, in the future of our profession, we elevate our education. If you look at other medical professions, our profession is the only one that has diminished its curriculum hours in order to go into the future. BC at one point used to be 3,000 hours, and now we're back down to 2,000, 2,400, depending on the semester and the curriculum. Sometimes it's close to 3,000, depending on the school. But, you know, if you look at other medical professionals like nurses, PTs, kinesiologists, occupational therapists, counselors, dietitians, athletic trainers, respiratory therapists, and nuclear medicine therapists and technicians, they all have bachelor's and master's degrees.
Yeah.
They didn't at one point in time when we didn't. And since we went down to the 2,400 hour point from the 3,000, all of them have advanced.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really hurting us. You know, I understand that our school system is a privately run school system, but I also understand business and creating product. And the students really are a product of the educational system of the private institution. And I really think that if a private institution would take upon the challenge of providing to produce the best quality of product possible by, you know, having a standard of at least an hourly equivalent of a bachelor's or a master's degree program, I think that would just completely change the landscape for our profession and would provide us a little bit more respect across the professions than what we currently get. I know that our patients respect us, you know, more than what we think they do. And they value us for the treatment that we provide and the quality of care that we provide. But I think globally as a medical profession, I think that if we had elevated and taken upon the challenge to get to that bachelor's and get to that master's degree programs, I think we'd be in a completely different elevated position than where we are currently right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So are all schools, because we do have publicly funded programs in Ontario, are all the schools in BC privately funded?
Langara is not privately funded, so that's public.
But the majority are?
I think all the other ones are.
Okay.
You know, if this was like a university grade education like UBC or SFU have, you know, it'd be a completely different game.
Yeah, for sure. Couldn't agree more there. And I think, yeah, there are a number of things that we need to see to push the profession forward, but I think, yeah, that would be a really great one and would really set a standard. And I mean, and this is coming from you that's in BC, which is sort of the most educated really place in the world, right?
We were at one point, but now we're the same as everywhere else in Canada.
Or the, yeah.
There was sort of the guise of, well, you know, BC's at 3,000 hours, the rest of Canada is at 2,400. So we need to come down to the rest of Canada's standards. It's like, no, actually we can stay at 3,000 hours and everybody else can stay where they're at. We have the agreement on internal trade, which allows the ease of transport within the profession from one province to another. So there's no need for us to decrease our hours. Yeah. And then the story was, well, we're going to become more of a competency based and we can be more competent with less hours of education, which is just, it's a lie as far as I'm personally concerned.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate.
You know, so I think it would be really awesome if nationally, or even like provincially, like within the Canadian Massage Alliance, within that alliance, if we would set the goal for a bare minimum, like the PTs now, it's a minimum of a master's. There's no bachelor's in science for PTs any longer. It's a minimum of a master's.
Yeah,
that's awesome. My friends that I know that have their master's PT, and my friends that have got their DPT, their doctorate in physiotherapy, those guys are just a completely different level of therapists. They're just some of the PTs, the DPTs that I've come into contact with and had communications with are just awesome, awesome clinicians.
Yeah.
So you know that's kind of the respect that I would love for us to have, for someone to say, man, that massage therapy profession in Canada, wow, those guys are game changers. They are challenging the profession to advance, to elevate itself to its highest potential. That's what I would love to see for our profession.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think we have I love the career just as much as you, and I think we've got a great profession. We've got the ability to, change people's lives, have a great career. But I agree with you that, moving forward, it would be great to see a more broad-based minimum standard by which everyone could be on the same page.
So that's where we come into play with our own courses that we teach, is that it's our personal soapbox to elevate people, to challenge them to perform at a level that they don't even know that they can perform at yet.
Yeah.
And then to educate them as to, what the current understanding is, and here's how to be in the middle and incorporate both the history of and what the future is.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue. Do you have time to share? I know we talked a little bit about that case. Do you have time to share? I think this would be a great opportunity to kind of leave with a teaching point about, a difficult case that you've had and maybe, recognizing things from the get-go. So,
sure. So just a couple of things with cases that are challenging. Sometimes it's challenging for therapists because, again, their level of education or their level of expectation is to fix something, and then it doesn't get fixed, so then it becomes very frustrating. So, there's a challenge that way personally, but then there's also a challenge professionally with some things that will walk through your door as a patient that you've never seen before. No one ever told you you were going to treat, and no one has given you any information or education as to how to handle it. Not just handling it as a medical professional, but also handling it psychologically and emotionally afterwards. At the end of the day, when someone has given you some information, or you have learned the history of an experience that someone has been through, and it's extremely traumatic. For example, a majority of my patients, for whatever reason, I don't know how this started, but a majority of my patients that I see have been through some type of abuse, be it either psychological abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or a combination of all three of those. And for those stories to come out, no one really gave me any information or guidance or structure as to how to work with that afterwards. Like, what do you do with that when you close your doors at the end of the day and you're done? How do you go back home to your family and your children and hang out with your loved ones and your friends and so on and so forth? So, so I would encourage therapists to, the majority of us that are registered with our provincial associations, we have access through the insurance plan for clinical counseling and psychologists, psychiatrists, that kind of stuff. And I think that just like front line workers and care workers and emergency services and fire, ambulance, and police all have that service that they access, I think we need to access that also. We tend to hear different stories than what the physios and the chiros do. So I think that's an important aspect that doesn't get talked about much at all for our profession. So as far as a challenging case would go, I think that's important to make that statement. Some of them are just like the challenging case we were talking about beforehand. This goes back to 20 years ago. I had a patient who was out for a boys' weekend. He was all-terrain vehicling. He went up and over a large tree. On the other side of the tree was a ravine that he didn't know was there, and it was about a 20 or 30 foot drop. And when he went over the ravine and when he went head first impacting into the ground, his hand was still on the handlebars. And as the handlebars contacted or came to a stop, his humerus kept going. So this is his humerus at the time of the fracture. So wow. He's in the ER. This is an ER image. So obviously he needs to have surgery in order to repair the structural deformity. And this is the surgery. Let me see if I make this bigger, does that work?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So as you can see, there's plates, pins, wires, you've got staples along the outside, and it's knitting his humerus back into more of a functional sort of structural position. Placement, you can see this is the posterior and AP sort of view. You can see that there's some little bone fragments off to the side. They sort of just let those calcify and ossify back into place. That will, within the next year, that'll all sort of form up nice and evenly. One of the issues that he was having with this was that he didn't have a full extension of his elbow with this hardware in place. And upon looking at these x-rays, we were able to educate him that, there's been some structural damage. Although the surgeons are amazing and they do the best that they can, there is no way possible to completely recreate the exact same structure pre-injury as post-injury. So the depth of the olecranon fossa, where the olecranon process goes into, was more shallow. So because it's more shallow, it prevents you from having full extension. There's a structural deformity in place. You will never get full extension. No matter how hard you try, you will never get it. If you do get it, it will come at a high price. So he was fine with that. and we worked through it, and we were gaining a lot of function. A lot of discomfort was being alleviated. He was just about ready to head back to work. He was receiving treatment from myself and from a physio outside of our office. Now, I love physios. Physios are awesome. Unfortunately, the one that he was seeing, she chose to ignore the x-rays and the hardware, and she chose to rely on her belief that she could attain full range of motion. And he came into the office one day, and his this is left humerus. His left arm was the size of his thigh. It was just absolutely huge. And I inquired as to like, hey, like, what's going on with your arm? This is not normal. This is not good. He informed me that the physio had attained full range of motion. And she had bent the plate and disrupted the pins and the screws in order to get that full range of motion. And this is what the result was. The plate is actually bent in 3 different angles, not only anteriorly and posteriorly, but she also bent the plate laterally.
Wow.
So there is a before and an after image of the plates.
Wow.
And there's a before and after of the plates from an anterior posterior view. So we immediately called 911. The patient was in shock at that point. He didn't recognize he was in shock, but he was in full sympathetic protection, cold sweat. So we had to call 911, get the emergency guys out to take him. I immediately gave the emergency ward a call, and I also had, because I had his x-ray reports, I was able to actually get a hold of the surgeon who had done the original surgery and inform him as to what was happened. He was, as you can expect, extremely unhappy. The patient had immediate emergency surgery that afternoon, and this is what they installed in order to correct the damage from attaining full range of motion from the physio. So it's quite a journey for this patient to go through. He was almost to the point where he was gaining his life back. He was going to go back to work. He's a heavy duty mechanic for a helicopter company, and this set him back another 18 months. Because of all of this, his body started to reject the hardware, and they had to actually go and do a 3rd surgery to remove the hardware because he was just in so much pain and discomfort. And this is what his humerus looks like now. So this is current. So just to give all therapists, no matter what medical aspect or profession that you're in, be it a manual therapist, a physiotherapist, massage therapist, a chiro, an osteopath, occupational therapist, kinesiologist, you have to be respectful of the structural changes that take place with some type of osseous injury. And you have to recognize that although your ego and your patient's desire for full function and full range of motion might be very strong, structurally, it's not a possibility. And we have to be comfortable in educating our patients and providing them that knowledge and that education. So, so yeah, that's my story of my elbow patient. This is the hardware that he had to have replaced. And this is the damage that was done by somebody whose ego wanted to attain full function because that's what they were told they were capable of getting from a book or from a professor or a teacher or something. So you really do have to, reflect and think logically about certain things.
Yeah, really interesting case for sure. And you couldn't be more correct in that, just because you've seen it in a textbook, it doesn't mean that you need to get it there based on the injury and where the patient's currently at. And it's unfortunate that happened to the patient, but certainly, they're also fortunate that they were able to see you and you were able to recognize it. Um, you know, I'll get a lot of people ask me, well, how do you get these cool cases? You know, how do these come in your office? And I just think, first of all, you have to be willing to accept them yourself, because I feel like, you know, what a lot of new therapists would say to that is, well, I've never seen that before. And it's like, well, you also had never seen that before it walked through your door, right? And you just take the principles of what you know, the fact that you've been doing this a long time, and you go back to the basics of assessing, you know, available range of motion, activities of daily living, restrictions, discomforts, and all that, like you would do with any injury. And then do your research. Read, you know, I find reading surgical reports is really valuable. Reading radiology reports allows you to understand a lot, and just, you know, immersing yourself in what are the physios doing for this, what are chiros doing for this, grabbing things from all bits of other professions to really build yourself into your own therapist, right? Nobody's going to be the same. You and I could have that case. We would approach it completely differently, I imagine. Some things would cross over, and we both would be able to get favorable results based on our own, you know, our own style. And I think that's one of the great things about having these conversations and discussions. You know, I'll take some things from this discussion, we're integrated into my practice, and you know, hopefully you'll do the same. And that's just how we get better and continue to evolve as a profession, rather than you know, just sort of standing still and accepting everything as is, and everything is so concrete right now. I think it's important to always have these conversations.
I think you hit it also with, you know, you have to be open and accepting to whatever comes in. And I think you have to be comfortable in not knowing, in having to provide the best quality of care you can at that point in time. And having to be comfortable and secure in your knowledge and your education and your capabilities to be able to help that patient, even in the most minimalist, you know, aspect. And if it's something that you are just completely uncomfortable with, you don't think you have the education or the knowledge or the skill or the experience in order to help that patient, then you refer out to someone who you respect that you think does also. We have a couple of, I've come into contact with new therapists that would look at that case and go, I would vomit, and I would refer out immediately. I wouldn't even touch them. I've also come into contact with therapists that have been practicing 30 years that have the exact same perspective.
Yeah.
I would not know what to do with that. I would refer out, I would vomit.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like I had the privilege of instructing or examining a student at Lingera right before her board exams. And oh my God, man, she was just like, you can see that she was functioning on all cylinders. She was performing to the highest potential that she had. I actually inquired as to, you know, like, I need her name and number, because as soon as she graduates, I want to hire her.
Right.
And for the people that are in my office that I work with now, I hired them all from when I was teaching at college, because you would see somebody who had that potential right in term one, but then I had to wait 3 years in order for them to be at a point where I could hire them.
Right.
So, and I like what you said about, saying, you know, that I could see them and you could see them. We could do things completely differently, and the patient would still benefit from it.
Yeah.
And that just, you know, lends to the fact that it doesn't come down to technique. It doesn't come down to, you know, anything like that. It comes down to knowledge, personability, being interested in the patient, and just doing the best you can with what you have in order to help them through whatever they're going through.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we could probably do this for a few more hours, but I think we've kind of covered most stuff off. Just in closing, I know that the book's out. Again, ligament pain referral patterns. I know that it was sold out. Have you restocked and you're ready to go, or are you still
Oh
waiting?
yeah. Yeah, printing books takes like 5 days.
Okay.
So no, I've got lots of stock.
So where can
What
people find you to learn more about Last? And I mean, you know, this book, and there'll be some personal bias here because we know each other, but this book is an incredible book, and I think that this book is missing from a lot of manual therapy. I think this book needs to be in all manual therapy schools, because this you don't see this in textbooks, in manual therapy textbooks. I think it's it's well put together. It's simple and easy to use. You've made it the perfect size to be a reference manual. You can put it in, your bag, and it's not a big textbook. And like you said, these referral patterns in the book, you're seeing in a lot of these patients, and you're not knowing where they're coming from. And this can allow you to start to open up and think about different thought processes with respect to just questioning your patients. Is this a ligament-based injury? Is it a joint-based injury? Is this being referred from elsewhere? So I think you've done a fantastic job with the book. I think it's well worth the purchase. I think everyone should have it. So please let everybody know where they can find the book and more about your courses as well, which are also great.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, the book's got so there's no anecdotal research in the book. It's all published scientific journal papers from researchers. It's information from anesthesiology texts, denervation texts, neurological texts, prolotherapy history and texts also, and research papers. And one of the things that I'm really this is a project that's sort of continuing now, is that we have for muscle and for skin, we have nerve root, nerve, and then area of tissue or muscle that is innervated. And we didn't have that for joint capsule ligamentous tissue. So I've included that in all of the chapters for every area of the book. So there's nerve root, nerve, and then is it conoid or trapezoid ligament, or is it anterior, posterior joint capsule? What part of it? So and then the references to go along with that. So that I'm really happy with that. People can go to ligamentpain.com where they can purchase the book. They can also purchase the poster set, which has the same images there. For anything concerning ligamentous articular strain technique, people can go to lastsite.ca, so LASTSITE.ca, and you can learn all about the online courses and live courses through there, and you can contact me through either of those sites.
Sweet. Well, my friend, I appreciate your time. For those that are watching and listening, as always, I hope that you found this kind of bonus episode to be valuable for you. If you have any questions, I'm going to tag Robert in this post as well, so it'll be shared around. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below as always, and we'll see you in the next one.